Welcome to the channel where imagination knows no limits. Here we bring you thrilling and captivating stories designed to ignite your spirit and keep you on the edge of your seat. Today you are about to dive into a suspenseful tale of survival, strategy and courage as humanity faces an overwhelming threat unlike anything ever seen before. In this gripping journey, strategic human forces clash against the relentless march of zombies, forging battles that test the strength, wit and resilience of those who refuse to surrender. As you join us in this epic saga, you will experience bravery, sacrifice, and unexpected twists that will leave you wanting more. Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss a moment of the action. Now get ready for an adventure that will captivate your mind and stir your soul. The night sky was pitch black as Commander Adrian surveyed the ruined city from the rooftop of a crumbling building. His sharp eyes darted across the streets below, where the shadows moved unnaturally slow and heavy. A soft wind carried the foul stench of decay, hinting at the army that was gathering beyond the shattered walls. Adrian tightened the strap of his rifle across his chest and spoke quietly into the comm unit clipped to his collar. "All squads check in," he said, his voice steady but low. Across the channel, the voices of his elite teams confirmed their readiness, scattered in key positions around the stronghold. The city of Haven was once a bustling metropolis. Now it was the last standing fortress between the human survivors and the endless horde of the undead. Months of planning and preparation had gone into this moment. Electric fences, mounted turrets and strategically placed traps lined the perimeter, but Adrian knew it would not be enough to simply defend. They needed a plan to outwit the horde, to buy time for the evacuees to escape. At the main gate, Captain Isla Moran stood with her unit of sharpshooters, eyes trained through scopes as they scanned the darkness. Isla was one of the best, a cool-headed strategist who rarely missed a shot, and Adrian trusted her instincts without question. "You see anything yet?" he asked over the comms. "Nothing yet," she replied, "but they are coming, I can feel it." Suddenly a low growl echoed from the darkness, followed by a chorus of moans growing louder by the second. Isla spotted them first, a massive wave of shambling figures stumbling toward the gates at a terrifying speed. "They are here," she called out. Adrian gave the command, "Light them up." Flare guns shot into the sky, bathing the battlefield in an eerie red glow. The sharpshooters opened fire with deadly precision, aiming for the heads of the advancing zombies. Each hit dropped a body to the ground, but there were too many, far too many. The first line of electric fences crackled to life, sending arcs of electricity through the front ranks of the horde, bodies convulsing and falling in heaps. Adrian moved quickly, barking orders over the comms units. "Alpha and Delta engage. Beta hold your ground. Gamma flank left. Isla keep covering fire. Constant. We need to funnel them into the kill zone." He watched as his people moved like clockwork, years of training honed into perfect execution. Despite their preparations, the zombies pushed forward, relentless and unthinking, driven by a primal hunger. Their sheer numbers threatened to overwhelm the defenses. Adrian knew if even one breach occurred, the entire operation could collapse. Sweat trickled down his brow, but he refused to show fear. Not now, not ever. Inside the command center, Lieutenant Marcus Vale monitored the situation through a network of drones and security cameras. His fingers flew across the keyboards, calculating trajectories, predicting movement patterns. "They are focusing on the west barrier," Marcus reported, his voice tense. "We need more firepower there." "Copy that," Adrian said. "Isla, redirect 2 shooters to the west wall. Tell them to use incendiaries. Slow them down." Isla acknowledged and immediately relayed the new orders. Within minutes, fire arrows shot out, setting the advancing zombies ablaze. The flames created a wall of fire, forcing the horde to split their ranks, exactly what Adrian had hoped for. Still, it was not enough. For every zombie that fell, 2 more took its place. Adrian felt the weight of every decision pressing down on him. Each life here mattered, each second counted. He needed to trigger the next phase of the plan, but once initiated there would be no turning back. "All squads prepare for phase 2, he said over the comms. "This is it. Hold your ground until the last possible second, and may fortune favor the bold." He checked the explosives planted beneath the critical pathways leading into the city, only moments away from being detonated at the perfect time to collapse the most vulnerable sections, trapping as many zombies as possible. The fate of Haven, and perhaps humanity itself, rested on their shoulders, and the battle had only just begun. As the first explosions echoed through the streets, the earth trembled beneath the weight of the blast. The ground cracked and ruptured, creating a massive barricade that temporarily halted the zombies' advance. The shrieks of the undead were drowned out by the booming roar of the blast, but it was not enough to stop them completely. They were relentless. Commander Adrian watched as the fiery barrier lit up the night sky. The zombies that had been closest to the explosion were thrown back by the shockwave, their bodies burning and writhing in the air. But even as the fire raged, the swarm shifted in response, immediately adapting to the new obstacle. "Isla, report," Adrian demanded, his voice clipped but urgent. "I see them," Isla's voice came through, steady as always. "The horde's adjusting, their regrouping, splitting into 2 factions. We can't stop them all with fire alone. They're headed for the north and east gates now." Adrian cursed under his breath. The barrier had worked for the moment, but the zombies were already adjusting. They were unpredictable, a living flood of chaos that would continue to press forward until there was nothing left to fight for. All units hold their positions but prepare for retreat, Adrian ordered. We need to pull them into the second phase of the plan faster than anticipated. He turned and began heading toward the center of the stronghold, where the next line of defense was waiting. A high-tech magnetic field generator hidden beneath the city was the only thing that could effectively slow the zombies and prevent them from overwhelming the remaining barriers. It was their last hope. Lieutenant Marcus Vale had already begun setting up the generator, his fingers dancing across the control panel with precision. We're almost ready, Commander, Marcus said without looking up. If we time this right, we can trap the horde inside the inner city area, but it will only last for a few minutes before the generator needs to recharge. That's all we need, Adrian replied, his jaw set. Hold the line as long as possible. Meanwhile, Captain Isla Moran was leading the sharpshooters in a calculated retreat, creating false openings to draw the zombies toward the generator's location. They had one shot to draw the horde into the kill zone and deploy the magnetic field without it being destroyed too early. The zombies were relentless, their hollow eyes gleaming with hunger as they pursued the survivors without mercy. With each passing moment, the tension mounted. The sharpshooters fell back slowly, picking off stragglers and forcing the zombies into a tighter formation. Their footsteps echoed through the empty streets like a countdown to disaster. Adrian glanced back toward the fortified entrance to the inner city as a low growl reverberated through the air. The ground began to shake more violently this time, the horde pressing forward with terrifying speed. We're losing ground, Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. The generator's not going to hold them for long if we don't trigger it now. Adrian didn't wait for the rest of the sentence to be spoken. He turned to the control panel, pressing the activation button with a firm push. His heart raced as the massive magnetic pulse surged to life, sending a shockwave across the area. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then the ground around the zombies cracked open, and the magnetic field engaged. A pulse of energy swept over the horde, pulling and twisting the creatures toward the center of the field. The first wave of zombies fell to the ground, their limbs caught in the magnetic force, while the second wave collided with the force field, stumbling and disorienting themselves. It worked. The zombies were trapped within the confines of the city's inner perimeter. Their movement slowed as they struggled against the magnetic pull, but it was only temporary. The pulse would not last forever, and the longer they waited, the more vulnerable their position became. We have a few minutes, Adrian said urgently. Everyone fall back to the secondary defenses. Prepare for a full retreat when the field drops. We're running out of time. His voice carried through the comms as his team moved swiftly into position, securing every entry point in the inner city with the magnetic field in place. The survivors had a brief but crucial window to regroup and prepare for the next stage of the battle. In the midst of the chaos, Isla and her sharpshooters continued their strategic retreat, planting explosives along the way to further disrupt the zombies' progress. If they were lucky, the traps would slow the horde enough to buy them precious time. Adrian's mind raced as he ran through the variables. He had never anticipated the zombies would adapt so quickly, but then again, he reminded himself, they weren't dealing with a traditional enemy. They were fighting a force of nature, something that could not be reasoned with or predicted. As the last of his team made it to the inner defenses, Adrian took a deep breath and surveyed the battlefield once more. The magnetic field would not hold forever, but for now, it had bought them a few precious moments of respite. The horde was temporarily contained, but they weren't out of danger yet. In the dim glow of the city's failing lights, Adrian knew that the real battle was only just beginning. The air was thick with tension as the magnetic field began to lose its strength. The hum that had once been steady and forceful started to flicker, signaling that the barrier was beginning to drain the last of its power. Adrian's heart raced as he watched the undead shamble and claw against the pull, their feral instincts making them more aggressive with every passing second. 5 minutes, Marcus called out from the control center, his voice strained as he watched the countdown. We won't be able to recharge the field in time for another wave. Adrian didn't waste a second. Hold them back as long as you can keep the inner defenses intact. We have one shot to break through to the evacuation tunnels. Get everyone ready for the fallback position. If we don't make it through this, it's over for Haven. On the front lines, Captain Isla Moran was already organizing her sharpshooters into a defensive perimeter. Her sharp eyes never left the advancing horde as she calmly directed her team. Focus fire on the first wave. Take out the heads. Do not let them get too close. The zombies were slowly regaining their footing, learning how to circumvent the magnetic pull. Their movements were erratic but coordinated, as if they were instinctively aware that time was running out for them to catch their prey. Adrian could see the first of them breaking free, their limbs twisted and contorted, their bodies grotesque but determined. Isla, he shouted through the comms, "We need to slow them down, now." Isla's voice came through, colder than ever, "On it, Commander." The sharpshooters began to fire once more, each bullet finding its mark with deadly precision. Their target was clear, limbs first to disable their movement, then a clean shot to the head to ensure they stayed down. But the zombies weren't the only threat now. With the magnetic field fading, the undead were able to push forward with greater ferocity, and soon, the barricades began to buckle under the pressure. Adrian watched with grim determination as his soldiers worked tirelessly to hold the line. They fought as though their very lives depended on every shot, every decision. But Adrian knew that the clock was ticking, and the human forces were quickly being outnumbered. In the command center, Marcus was already preparing the next phase of the plan. If the field failed entirely, they would have no choice but to fall back to the tunnels. The underground routes led out of the city and into the wilderness, where the last of the human survivors had gathered, waiting to escape. But the plan had a flaw. Too many people would be trapped in the evacuation process, and the zombies would be close behind. "Adrian, we're running out of time," Marcus warned, eyes glued to the screen. "The generator's about to go down. We need to move, now." Adrian's mind raced through the possibilities. They had to make it to the tunnels before the zombies overwhelmed them. All their preparation, all their sacrifice, would be for nothing if they didn't move fast enough. "Everyone, fall back," Adrian commanded into the comms, his voice sharp and commanding. "Head for the tunnels, immediately. Don't stop for anything." The order was given, and a quick response followed as soldiers began to retreat in an organized chaos, moving toward the underground escape routes. The sharpshooters provided cover, laying down suppressive fire as the horde closed in. But every shot felt like a waste. They were fighting a losing battle, just trying to buy time for the others to escape. Isla's voice was calm, but there was an edge of urgency beneath it. "Commander, we can't hold them back much longer. They're too many." Adrian nodded, his mind focused on one goal: survival. They had prepared for this moment, but nothing could have prepared them for the sheer relentlessness of the undead. The horde wasn't just attacking, it was hunting. They were methodical, undeterred by fire or weaponry, and nothing short of complete destruction would stop them. "We can't fight them all, but we can make sure the others get out." Adrian gritted his teeth as he began to move toward the entrance to the tunnels, the weight of his responsibility heavier than ever. The lives of hundreds rested on the success of this mission, and Adrian would not let them down. As the last of his team reached the entrance to the tunnels, Adrian's heart pounded in his chest. They were so close to safety. But the zombies were closing in, their hunger palpable and relentless. The air grew thick with dread, and for the first time since the beginning of the outbreak, Adrian wondered if they were truly going to make it out alive. The first of the horde breached the perimeter, their twisted, broken bodies spilling into the streets, groaning and snarling in unison. Adrian watched in horror as the undead surged forward, a wave of destruction that seemed to swallow everything in its path. "Move," he shouted, pushing the last survivors toward the tunnels. But just as he turned to follow, a blood-curdling scream filled the air. It was one of his soldiers, caught in the chaos, pulled into the mass of zombies before anyone could reach him. The sound of flesh tearing and bones breaking rang through the air, and Adrian's heart sank. He had no choice but to leave him behind. The evacuation was the only hope they had. "Keep moving," Adrian screamed again, the urgency in his voice carrying the weight of the moment. His mind screamed in protest, but he couldn't afford to lose any more time. The tunnel entrance was so close, but so was the horde, and the gap between life and death was razor thin. As the last survivors entered the tunnels, Adrian took one last look at the battlefield, now overrun by the undead. There was nothing left to fight for. But in that moment, he knew they had one chance to survive, one last hope, if they could make it out alive. The tunnels were dark, damp, and filled with the distant echo of hurried footsteps as the survivors made their way deeper into the underground. The sounds of the chaos above slowly faded into silence, but the tension remained thick, like a weight on everyone's chest. The air was heavy with fear and uncertainty, but also a flicker of hope. Commander Adrian Pierce led the way, his mind racing as he calculated their next steps. The horde had breached the outer defenses, but they had made it to the tunnels. If they could reach the safe zones, they might have a chance to regroup and mount a more strategic defense. But the journey was far from over. The underground network stretched for miles, twisting and turning, and it was uncertain whether they would even reach the other side without encountering more danger. "We're not out of the woods yet," Adrian said, his voice low but steady as he looked back at the group of survivors trailing behind him. The group consisted of soldiers, civilians, and a handful of the remaining medical staff, all trying to keep their composure. Captain Isla Moran, always by Adrian's side, spoke up, "We need to keep moving, fast. The longer we stay here, the more vulnerable we are to the zombies' adaptation. They're already learning how to follow our scent even underground. Adrian nodded grimly. Isla's right, we've only got one shot to make it through these tunnels safely. If we hesitate even for a second, we risk being overtaken. The survivors moved quickly, trying to make as little noise as possible, their footsteps echoing in the narrow passageways. The only sounds were the shuffle of boots against dirt and the occasional whisper of someone checking their weapon or making sure their loved ones were close by. As they descended further into the depths, the air grew colder, and the claustrophobia began to set in. Adrian could feel the pressure mounting on him, but he refused to let it show. He had been through too much already and could not afford to fail now. After what felt like hours of winding through the tunnels, they reached a small chamber, a temporary rest stop in the underground network. It was the last place they could afford to stop before they reached the main evacuation point, a remote bunker deep in the mountains, where a surviving faction of humanity awaited. We need to rest for 5 minutes, get the last of our supplies, Isla suggested, but only 5. We can't afford any more delays. Adrian agreed, though his gut twisted with the knowledge that every second counted. The moment they stopped, the risk of the zombies catching up increased, and with it, the threat of everything falling apart. As the group gathered around, a few soldiers started distributing water and medical supplies, while others kept watch, their eyes scanning every corner of the chamber for signs of danger. But Adrian could feel it in his bones. Something was off. Suddenly, a faint sound came from the far side of the chamber, like the scrape of something dragging along the tunnel floor. Everyone froze, weapons raised, their eyes scanning the darkness. Then, without warning, a screech split the silence, echoing through the tunnels like a banshee's wail. Adrian's heart skipped a beat as he realized what it was. One of the zombies had found them, and it was not alone. The horde was closer than they thought. Get moving! Adrian barked, but it was already too late. The first zombie appeared, its grotesque form emerging from the shadows, followed by more and more of them, their bloodshot eyes gleaming in the dim light. Form up! Isla shouted, her voice commanding despite the panic setting in. Keep them at bay, fall back to the next passage. Don't let them corner us. The survivors scrambled to their feet, firing as quickly as they could. The zombies charged, shrieking in hunger and rage, their bodies twisted and misshapen by months of decay. Adrian fired into the nearest horde member, watching it drop to the ground with a single shot, but there was no time to savor the kill. The rest of the group was moving, pushing their way toward the next section of the tunnels, their only hope being to outrun the zombies long enough to reach the evacuation point. Go, go, go! Adrian urged, leading the charge as the rest of the survivors followed closely behind. The tunnel stretched ahead, an endless maze that seemed to offer no escape, but it was their only option now. In the chaos, one of the survivors, a young woman named Lily, tripped and fell, her scream echoing in the tunnel. Adrian didn't hesitate. He turned and reached down, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her to her feet. Stay with us, Lily, stay with us, he shouted, his voice filled with urgency. Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her weapon and continued running, her feet barely touching the ground. The tunnel began to widen, and soon they came to a junction that led to another network of passages. If they could just make it through this next stretch, they would be within striking distance of the bunker. But the zombies were close, too close for comfort. Adrian turned to Isla, who had been watching the rear with her sharpshooters. We have to hold them back here, Isla, he said, his voice steely. Do whatever it takes to give us a chance to reach the bunker. Isla nodded, signaling her team into position. We'll hold them off as long as we can just make sure the rest of the group gets to safety. Adrian looked at his soldiers and survivors, many of whom were still breathing heavily from the earlier sprint. We move together, we fight together, and we survive together, he said, the words burning with an intensity that resonated through the group. And so, with one last push of determination, the survivors began the final leg of their journey through the tunnels. A wave of fear washed over Adrian as they made their way toward the evacuation point, but there was no turning back now. They had made it this far, and they would not stop until the last of them was safe. With every step, the echoes of the horde behind them grew louder, but the light of hope flickered ahead, and Adrian knew that they had to reach it, or all would be lost.